welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. I am your host, Tommy Brzee. It is May 3rd, and let's jump right in. We have a number of things to get to today. We're going to start with talking a little bit about Clemson versus the ACC. There's been a new twist in that among number of twists that have happened around that case over the last little bit, but Clemson seems to be kind of going on the offensive lately. Want to break down what that means and what the effects could be of that. And then we'll get into a little bit of talk around bowl games. There's been a lot of talk about players opting out of bowl games. It sounds like there might be a solution coming down the road in terms of NIL structure. Then we'll get into a little bit of a spring overreactions. We did this yesterday with the SEC, and we're going to continue on with the SEC. I had a couple more that I wanted to get out there, so we're going to do part 2 of that today, and then we'll finish it off with a transfer portal update. Things are starting to wrap up, tons of commitments coming in, a lot of defensive players still on the board, so I want to break down everything that you guys need to know there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the Tip and Donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a kind of a fun, interactive experience here. We both get to kind of go back and forth, which is always fun for the both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about Clemson and the ACC. There's been so much going on with Clemson, ACC, Florida State. All of this has had a ton of twists and turns, a lot of confusing language because frankly I am no law major. I am not someone that is very well versed in that part of the field. So it's been a little bit of a learning experience, I think, for us all as this has kind of gone on. But Clemson has been a little bit quiet as of lately. Their suit was filed against the ACC countersuited, and then we didn't hear a lot for quite some time, and now we've heard something quite big. It sounds like Clemson is kind of going on the offensive here. They are suing the ACC. I believe it is a new lawsuit. I'm not entirely sure about that. It was an amended argument for the past one, but it could be that they added another one into the mix. I'm not exactly sure about that. I know the ACC followed that up with countering again to them, so it'll be really interesting to see all this unfold. But essentially, what the new argument is against the ACC for Clemson is they are seeking damages from the ACC, and they're doing it because they believe that the ACC made misstatements and slander against Clemson's title and its own media rights and other tangible property. So the best way to kind of put this is Clemson is certainly in a position where they know that at some point they are getting out of the ACC. It just matters what the, final payment is going to be, obviously, right? They also know that because of that, they are now pitching themselves to other conferences. That's just kind of the way of things. You're putting yourself out there and you're hoping that someone picks you up. They are saying that the ACC being so hard set on saying that this media rights deal is ironclad and you can't do anything about it, and if they try to get out of it, they have to pay an exorbitant amount of money. All of these things that have kind of been surrounding this Clemson and ACC case in particular, they feel has hurt their chances for future, conference realignment, finding a place to set up shop in hopefully the SEC or the Big Ten, but they feel that that has been hurt by the ACC. So they're saying that the ACC is now essentially liable for that. They should not be able to assert certain things that are not fully true about their media rights deal or about Clemson, because Clemson is certainly in a position where they don't want any bad press going out there about them, especially if it has to do with how they're handling things with a certain conference, because you don't necessarily want to bring in someone that is having this type of issue with their conference and is butting heads so aggressively. So they feel the ACC has kind of made that a bigger deal than it is, I suppose, is kind of the biggest argument that can be made. So this is obviously quite the twist. It felt like the ACC was picking up a lot of confidence in both of these cases. I felt like the Florida State one was trending more and more in the ACC's direction, and this one still very well could go in the ACC's direction. But it does show that Clemson is kind of just fighting back, right? They're showing that they are not going to take this lying down. They're not just going to accept whatever comes over the table. They're going to, take what they want, and they're going to do it in the best way they know how. And I think it's something that we've talked about for quite some time and gotten into a little bit around here, but I think one of the biggest things for these schools that want to get out of the ACC, whether it's Clemson and Florida State who are already on the front lines, or Miami and North Carolina and all the teams that are watching from the sidelines, I think all of this is about just essentially overloading the ACC's plate. There's only so much money to go around. There's only so many resources to go around to all of these different battles that they've currently have to been fighting. So it's been one of those things that I think when you look at the tactics of Florida State and Clemson, I think it was fantastic that both of them went from different directions at the ACC, at least fantastic for them getting out of the ACC, because it gave it two totally different cases that you can't tie together, that you can't make argument for one and then, carry it over to the other argument for that as well. So it's one of those things that'll be really, really interesting to watch, and I think with the ACC, they really have to make sure that this is it. And we keep saying that. I feel like we said it after the Florida State case. We said it after the Clemson filed the first suit against them, and we're saying it again here. So this could possibly be something that we're saying, in a couple of weeks about Miami or UNC or whoever, but it's definitely something that the ACC has to, at the very least, put a stop to, or you have to be really hard-nosed about what that exit fee is going to be and not budge an inch. And now the problem with that is you can be as confident in that as you possibly want. If you're the ACC, you can feel like you have the best leg to stand on in the world and everything is going perfectly there. But one of the other things that was kind of thrown into this case by Clemson was they want sovereign immunity, which essentially means that they cannot be sued in another state other than South Carolina, which is a huge part of this case. It's something that we've talked about a number of times with Florida State and the ACC, where they countersued each other, but they did it in their specific states. And that created some interesting conversations, right? A lot of confusing back and forth kind of talk over the last little bit around that particular case, because you want it to be on your home turf. The ACC wants it to be in North Carolina. The Florida State wants it to be in Tallahassee. Clemson wants it to be in Clemson, South Carolina. That's just kind of the way things work. And if they are able to get sovereign immunity and are able to have this case be tried in South Carolina, that's a huge deal. That puts them firmly in the driver's seat as far as I can tell. And I think as well, the ACC still has, plenty of legs to stand on, plenty of arguments to be made. But at the end of the day, home field advantage doesn't just matter in college football games. It definitely does matter in the behind-the-scenes battles that they fight in the courtroom. So it's one of those things that it'll be really interesting to watch this unfold. I think Florida State kind of set the precedent, opened the door, and Clemson joined them fairly quickly, but it feels like Clemson might be on a little bit better footing right now in their particular case than Florida State is. Now, the big thing about this is these two cases are tied together regardless of what, regardless of if they're attacking from different angles, regardless of if they're totally different teams that want to go to different conferences. None of that really matters, right? They're attacking the same entity. They're attacking under different angles, but still, attacking the same thing, which is the grant of rights and the media deal that they are currently under. And if that falls apart, then it's open season. I think everyone understands that. I think it is so vital for the ACC to not only, you're probably not going to quote-unquote win these cases. I think there's very little reality where Florida State and Clemson are in the ACC even 2 years down the road, to be totally honest with you. I think they have made their decision, they've made their mind up, and they have enough money to fight this battle until it's done, essentially. So I think Clemson and Florida State are out the door. Your job now is to get as much money from those people and in the process, deter other teams from leaving, because some teams just can't pay the money that Clemson and Florida State can, and maybe Miami and North Carolina can. But it'll be really interesting to watch. I think the ACC is kind of in survival mode to a certain extent, but they are picking up a little bit of steam in these arguments. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot when if you do lose these two teams and it comes anywhere in the realm of $500 million and below, which it says it could go up to about $750 million. So if you can get it down to that number or below, UNC and Miami, I have no doubt, would follow you. And that becomes a problem because the ACC just has to stay above 15 teams in their league, or their contract with ESPN is null and void. And I think we all understand that when in college football, in pretty much every sport at this point, the people pulling the strings, the people with the most power are the TV companies that have these massive deals. If that falls null and void, the ACC is dead in the water. So right now the ACC is kind of grasping at straws, right? They're getting attacked from a number of different angles by a number of different entities, and they're trying to keep it at just those two schools. But there's a lot of things that could happen over the next little bit that would open some floodgates that the ACC just is not prepared for. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. I think it's one of those things that we've talked about, Clemson and Florida State for quite some time. And I think a lot of this is one of the big questions I have around this kind of case, especially the Clemson case, where they say the ACC has, diminished their value, has spoken with misstatements and false information, talking about their media deal and how hard it would be to come out of it and all of that type of stuff. They're saying has hurt their value. But how much of that is really the ACC's fault, I guess, is my big question. And I understand the ACC definitely played a part in that. They've definitely been very steadfast in this is, our media deal and it is ironclad and you can't do much of anything about it. But at the end of the day, when Clemson and Florida State decided to sue the ACC, when Florida State did it, and then when Clemson joined in, they knew there was a spotlight on them. They knew that in some ways it was going to be somewhat of a negative spotlight because when you're leaving one conference, you got to join another, and they don't want this situation in their conference to be happening, 10 years down the road if Clemson and Florida State are unhappy then. So some of this is, just when you put yourself in that kind of spotlight where you are going after your conference, there's going to be some bad blood. There's going to be some negative things that come out of that from other conferences and from other entities. But the ACC definitely does, play a certain part in that. So I think this will be one of the more fascinating things to watch. What are the arguments that are made by Clemson, first of all, but also how does the ACC kind of counter? Are they, very steadfast in their this is our deal and we're not budging at all? Or are they a little bit more amenable? Do they try to meet Clemson at least kind of halfway? Now, there's a very, very thin line that they have to walk, but do they try to do away with this problem and then deal with the Florida State problem and then kind of take this bit by bit? Because there's a reality where it all piles up and then you have 20 different problems all at the same time, and if that happens, the ACC is in really bad shape. So this will be really interesting to watch. Clemson just threw another wrench into what has been one of the more confusing storylines of the entire offseason. Now, I've thought about it a little bit. I think sometime next week I'll do a brief breakdown of just where we sit with all of this stuff, because I feel like there's a new story, there's a new angle every single day. So I want to give you guys an idea of just where we sit right this second and kind of where we could be going with these cases. So probably we'll do that early next week, so be on the lookout for that. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about an interesting ruling that could be coming in the next couple of years, hopefully, around a new NIL structure. And it's something that has to do with bowl games, and it would do away with something that I think a lot of college football fans very much hate. So we'll talk about that right when we get back from this break, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of news around the ACC and Clemson. There's been a new twist to a case that has had about every twist and turn you could possibly think of, but definitely a very, very interesting thing that we will follow very closely. But let's talk about bowl games, and let's talk about, hopefully, that not being a thing where players opt out all the time. So one of the biggest things that I've noticed over the last couple of years with college football fans is players sitting out bowl games is just not something we want to see. I think that's something everyone agrees with, to be totally honest with you. We want to see the best players on the field. We want to see some of the players that are playing the last game as a, Texas Longhorn, as a Michigan Wolverine, as a Kansas Jayhawk. It doesn't matter. We just want to see our favorite players on the field one last time, suit up for our favorite teams, right? So it's one of those things that we've been trying to fight against, and there was no real great solution necessarily under the current form of things, just because there's not a lot of structure around a lot of things that need some structure. But it sounds like something is trying to come to our aid, and it's the new NIL structure that is being discussed around college football. We talked about it earlier this week, where they're getting into kind of a revenue sharing contract type model when it comes to paying athletes. And I think it's something that probably should have happened quite a long time ago, to be totally honest with you, just because this was always going to come. This was always going to be the reality of college sports at some point, and we've just been a couple of years behind and playing a little bit of catch up because the NCAA just was not ready. Let's just be totally honest with each other. But one of the interesting things is the Bull Season executive director, Nick Capilari, had a very, very interesting quote where he was talking about kind of what the future of NIL would look like. And it would be bringing NIL collectives, which usually were, alumni run and technically separate from the school, although they would work with the athletic department, just didn't have, a direct affiliation with the school. They would bring those in-house, which I think is a huge step forward for NIL, partly because it would just make everything more transparent. Some of this stuff would just have to be public record because it is a public university. In the majority of these cases, obviously, it is a public university, so some of this would just have to be out there for everyone to see. So I think it's a really, really interesting thought, and it's something that I think all of us can get on board with. When we have all of these players who are in college sports for some time where it is an amateurized model, so you can't have guys, nailed down by specific contracts that they absolutely have to follow. That's just not something that is in the cards. But if you're going to start cutting them in on media deals, if you're going to start cutting them in on, getting a more regular type of payment than NIL deals and endorsement deals, then you can, demand some things of them. And that just is kind of the way of things, and it's the way that college sports have been going. And this is definitely a pro in my eyes. I think one of the things that Capilari said during his conversation was, in this case, talking about what stipulations they would have to follow with contracts and what stipulations everyone has to follow when they sign a contract for a particular job. He said, in this case, play 12 regular season games and a bowl game, or a bowl game and a playoff. That's logical to expect. It's the way the rest of us work and working folks operate, So essentially, he's just saying this is, jobs. This is the reality of any profession, whether it's, professional sports, which is what this is now, or, being a dentist or being a doctor, or it doesn't matter. You have certain things that you have to fulfill. And it's something that college football has been missing for quite some time, because you can't really enforce anything when there's no structure to the thing that you're trying to enforce, right? So I think this is a huge step forward. It's something that absolutely needs to happen. And one of the things, you hope will happen because of this, we talked about how transparency in NIL is so important. So hopefully that is a huge part of what comes, but also cohesive rules across different conferences, across different schools, because you don't want a reality where people are kind of fighting for who has the most lenient or who has the most player-friendly rules, because that would be really bad for just the reality of college football. And that would be really bad for just the confusion that fans would feel on a daily basis, and you would lose a lot of people that definitely love the sport right now, but are kind of holding on by a little bit of a thread. But just to give you an idea of how big of an issue this opt-out thing is, some people say it's not as big of an issue as some people think. Others say it's, the sky is falling type of issue, but it's somewhere in the middle. But to be fair, they estimate that there are about 8 players per team that opt out on average every single year, which is just a pretty insane number. And to be totally honest, I think good portion of that, not necessarily the entire thing obviously, but I do think a portion of that has to do with the current structure of the transfer portal and everything that happens in the month of December, where someone like, let's just say Malik Murphy is a good example of this at Texas, who they were going to a playoff game. He was going to be the backup quarterback in that playoff game, but every quarterback was finding their way somewhere else. He was essentially losing seconds and losing money and losing ability to find a good place to play every second that he stayed at Texas. So he was essentially forced to leave before he was ready, before he wanted to, before that playoff game that he absolutely deserved to be a part of, because this is the reality of college football. You have to put your name in the ring, because if you don't, you're going to have a problem. You're going to, either not find the right place to play, not find a good place for you to develop. Whatever it is, it's going to cause problems for you. So some of this needs to be fixed by the calendar just being common sense. I think the transfer portal period should come after the national title game. I don't think there should be any, blowback on that by any means. Players can, plan their futures during that time. They can't obviously talk to other teams. That's a totally other issue that we need to deal with in college football. But they need to set up a structure to where we're not plopping something that is hugely important to the sport right now in the middle of the most important aspect of the sport when it comes to football, which is the postseason and the new playoff that is kind of rolling through and everything like that. So I think it's something that needs to be fixed somewhat from a calendar perspective, but also it never hurts when you have, a little bit of a monetary value towards playing that final game and pushing yourself into that arena one more time and putting on that jersey one more time. I think it's everything. It's something that everyone can get behind for sure. But one of the things that really pushed this forward and made everyone see this as not only, a slight issue, but something that needs to be handled pretty much immediately was the Florida State and UGA game a year ago. I think everyone remembers that game very well. Florida State had pretty much every player that was a big-time player for them in 2023 sit out during that game, and it did not go well. It was 63-3. Georgia, you knew they were coming in with a lot of energy after that SEC game loss, and man, they took them to the woodshed. And one of the very interesting things that's happened in the last couple of days that I won't waste a lot of time on, to be totally honest with you, but Keon Coleman was on RG3's podcast talking about it and had the weirdest spin zone for this I think I've ever heard. He essentially blamed it on UGA losing to Bama in the SEC title game for why they didn't get to play a serious game. I've never seen that. Florida State could have showed up. They could have played the game, but they decided not to. I'll leave it at that, because that was just a weird clip that I'd rather not, get down a rabbit hole on, to be totally honest with you. So I think with all of this stuff, there's been so much emphasis on these players playing these games. You know, you want to see Keon Coleman out there. You want to see all of these elite players playing one last time for their teams, whether it's they're going on to the NFL, they're going into the transfer portal. These bowl games, in a certain extent, should be kind of an audition, and you don't want it to be, obviously, for some of these players, but if you're a backup player that gets into a game, it's kind of an audition if you're going to go into the portal later in the year, and that's just kind of the way of things right now. So I think it's always a great thing. I think you want as many players on the field as possible. Now, if I'm being totally honest, for me, it was never the biggest problem in the world, and partly because I'm a little bit of a freak when it comes to college football. I know a lot of these players. I know a lot of the, second line and third line players. I pay attention to recruiting very closely. So when I see, the freshman quarterback gets to start or the freshman tight end gets his first run, it's a cool thing for me. But at the end of the day, I am not a normal college football fan. And you need to, cater to some fans that want to see those big-time players playing in those big-time games, and it would just bring the fun back to bowl season. I remember when I was younger, bowl season was incredible. It was, every game felt like a huge game because it was the last one that you were going to see for a year. And now it feels like if you're not in the playoff, if you're not playing for that big trophy, then what's the point? Which is a crazy way to look at college football, in my opinion, but that's just kind of the way of things right now. So I think there's going to be a ton of movement on NIL and kind of the money structure that goes on in college football, and I think there will be a lot of negotiations. Hopefully some players can be in on those negotiations, which we talked about yesterday with UAB joining a players association, but this is genuinely some really good news. I think this is something that pretty much everyone can get behind, everyone can be excited about, because watching, the opt-outs just pile up every single day has been very, very frustrating. Watching a lot of the energy be put towards opting outs and transfer portal and all of the other things that are going on except for football is really annoying. I'll be totally honest with you. In December, it's one of my more frustrating months because there's such little emphasis on the football games that are being played. Instead, they focus on, where's this kid that just jumped into the portal going to go, in 2 months. So it's a very frustrating thing for, I think, a lot of college football fans. We want to talk about the games. We want to cover the games. We want to see the games. So I think it's something that we've wanted a change very, very imminently, and it looks like it's starting to come. Now, there's still a lot of T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted for sure when it comes to this plan, and they're going to have to get their ducks in a row. But at the end of the day, I do think this will happen. I do think this will be a huge point for fans and for the NCAA when it comes to these conversations. If this is not in there, I think there will be a lot of fans that will be very upset. But we'll keep track of that as it comes. I think this NIL stuff, changes very quickly, and there's a lot of different movement from here and there, but this is one that I can definitely get behind, and hopefully this comes sooner rather than later, because I would love to see a full bowl season this upcoming year without all the opt-outs and all the transfer portal news and all of that type of stuff. So we'll see what happens. I will definitely keep you updated with how all of this develops, because it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, and I think something that college football fans would just be counting down the days for. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about spring overreactions. We did this yesterday, talking about the SEC. We're going to go right back to the SEC today, because I had a ton pop into my head at the end of the day yesterday, so wanted to get those out there for you guys. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about a little bit of a mix-up to bowl season. Hopefully, we will see less opt-outs, more players on the field during those games, which I think is something everyone can get behind. But let's get into some spring overreactions. There has been a ton of stuff going on during spring and a ton of reports coming out, and let's be honest, we all love to overreact. We all love to get excited about our particular team. So if you're an SEC fan, you might want to stick around because I might have one for your team. But let's jump right in and let's go over to Lexington, Kentucky and talk about Brock Vandagriff. I think when you talk about Kentucky, one of the big things that has been missing, especially during the Mark Stoops era, is elite quarterback play. And now that came to a certain extent when Will Levis was in town. He had a couple of years that were very good. His junior year went for about 2,800 yards in 2021, 24 touchdowns, and 10 picks. So that was probably his best year. He had 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 10 picks in his senior year. So it was kind of a couple of good years. Not necessarily anything to light the world on fire, not necessarily what they had hoped when he came over from Penn State. And kind of the same thing happened with Devin Leary a year ago, where you have all these hyped up prospects coming in. You have this quarterback that you feel can run your offense really well, and it just never quite clicks. And that's something that happened for Kentucky, especially on the offensive side of the ball a year ago. But Brock Vandagriff is in town, and I feel like everything has changed almost overnight. You hear so many reports coming out of spring over and over about this kid just not only being incredible on the field, which is something I had very little doubts about. The arm talent on this kid is just out of this world. So I wasn't super worried about what he was going to be as a quarterback on the field. But off the field, this is the first time he was taking over the reins as the starting guy. This is the first time he was being the vocal and emotional and, leader of this team. The first time he had to be that guy in the locker room, and he's taking the bull by the horns, it sounds. It sounds like he is the vocal leader of this team. It sounds like he is all over the place when it comes to being the person that you need to be successful in the SEC, especially as a quarterback. And you combine all of that, the energy that he's coming with, the mindset that he comes with, the place that he's coming from in UGA. I think you put all that together with the group that he has in front of him with Barry Brown, Dane Key, Jamori Macklin, all catching passes from him. A great offensive line, to be totally honest with you. Very, very good players. Marquise Cox is going to be a fantastic player for them this upcoming year. And then a defense who I think is going to be one of the most surprising defenses in the entire country. This team has dudes at every single level. I think they have, Deone Walker is one of the best players in the entire country, period. You have J.J. Weaver coming off the edge. You have Damon Dumas-Johnson you brought in from UGA along with Brock Vandagriff at linebacker. You have Maxwell Harrison on the back end. There's just talent all over this roster, and I think they're going to give him some short fields. They're going to give him some ability to get a couple more drives under his belt, and I just think Brock Vandagriff's going to have an elite year and possibly override what Levis did during his 2 years at Kentucky. So will be a really interesting thing to watch. I think Brock Vandagriff is ready to roll, to be totally honest with you. But let's move on to Tennessee and talk about another quarterback that is ready to take the reins in Nico Iamaleava. He is someone that I really think can challenge that 2022 season from Hendon Hooker. And now that sounds lofty, and I totally understand that is a crazy take, because when you look at Hendon Hooker, that 2022 season was downright special. Before he went down with that torn ACL, that kid was the Heisman favorite. And frankly, I think he should have been in New York City regardless of the injury, but that's a totally different discussion that probably could have happened 2 years ago, but I'll leave that in the past for now. But Iamaleava has the ability to jump over Hendon Hooker. Now, it could be that this year is a little bit more of a learning process, but the kid looks ready to go. He's been absolutely ripping it in spring practice. Everyone has been absolutely glowing about this kid, and you have the wide receivers to go along with it. You have Dante Thornton, you have Squirrel White, Chaz Nimrod, Mike Matthews, who's a huge freshman coming in from Parkview High School in Georgia. So plenty to work with on the offensive side of the ball. And then when you have Josh Heupel on your right-hand hip and in your ear coming up to the snap, I think it's just going to be a match made in heaven is the way I was supposed to say that. I think he fits that offense perfectly. I think he has elite arm talent, and I think this kid could just light the world on fire and make Tennessee fans very, very excited about 2025. I'm not sure what 2024 looks like in terms of SEC championship or anything like that, but 2025, it could get really interesting in Knoxville. But Ole Miss is a team that everyone has been talking about a lot, and frankly, this team could absolutely be in Atlanta at the end of the year, and that's kind of what I have for them as an overreaction. Again, an overreaction, I want that to be said, but Lane Kiffin, the first couple of years at Ole Miss, it felt like kind of a revving car. It felt like the wheels were spinning, everything was kind of being set in place, but you hadn't put it into gear yet. And it feels like they put it into gear a little bit last year, and then especially with some of the transfers they brought in, I think they have fully put this thing into drive and are ready to start flying forward. So Jackson Dart throwing the ball to Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Caden Priestcorn is insane. Three guys that you would be tough to find better three guys across the entire country when it comes to those three positions. I think it's just going to be remarkably efficient, remarkably smooth. Jackson Dart going into his third year in the offense. It's going to be a thing of beauty, to be totally honest with you, on the offensive side of the ball the majority of the time. But then when you look at the defense, you have Walter Nolan coming in, Princely Umanmielen coming in, Chris Paul is going to be a great linebacker for them, not Chris Paul, but a transfer from Arkansas at linebacker. And then Trey Amos, I think, is going to start from them at corner. So just so much talent, and it's going to totally change the complexion of this team, hopefully make them a defensive team that at least can keep up, right? And that's kind of the biggest goal for them. You know, you don't have to be outright dominant, but you at least have to be able to slow down some of these offenses. You get UGA at home, which is the team that you would probably have to overcome to get to Atlanta. So a lot of things are pointing in their direction. And I think as long as this offense can run the way that they're supposed to run, as long as some of these defensive transfer guys can hit the way that they have at other programs. I mean, Walter Nolan was incredible at Texas A&M. Princely Umanmielen was incredible at Florida, and the same thing with Chris Paul Jr. Brandon Turnage was a great player. So all of this stuff, I think, is coming together for Ole Miss. This is the year where it feels like everything is in place. Everything is about as good as you could possibly hope it to be, and it might just take them to Atlanta at the end of the year. So it'll be really interesting to watch what happens with Ole Miss. I think they might be the most interesting team in the entire country going into this year, partly because of the main man they have up top, but also the team they put together is just out of this world talented. But let's move on and let's talk about who I consider to be the best player in the SEC, one of the best players in the entire country, and that's Luther Burden. I think this kid is out of this world. I think he is as good as you get at the wide receiver position for a number of reasons. You can line him up all over the field. He will run any route you possibly want. He's great after the catch. The catch radius is off the charts. And he's Brady Cook's instinctive target, which is a huge part of this, right? We have so many guys on that team. I mean, Theo Weiss and Mookie Cooper will have fantastic years. I have no doubt about that. But when you need a play, you know where they're going, and you know that he's going to make the play 9 times out of 10. I think this kid is just on a different level. And now Totori McMillan over there at Arizona is a fantastic player who absolutely will rival him for the Politnikoff and that top wide receiver position in the NFL draft next year. But I think when you look at what Luther Burden is capable of, not only, you know, from a route tree perspective, but just the connection that he has with Brady Cook, I think it's something that is just a little bit further along than Noah Fafita and Totori McMillan. Not to say that that is a bad connection by any means, but I think there will be a point in the season where people will start looking at 2024 Luther Burden and say, this looks a little bit like 2020 Devontae Smith in terms of numbers, not in terms of play style by any means. But I'm not sure if he'll be able to join Devontae Smith and Desmond Howard as the only Heisman winners that were wide receivers, but this kid, if anyone can do it, I think this kid is one of them that absolutely can. So very excited for what he can do. He's one of my favorite players in the entire country, to be totally honest with you. And he's going to light the world on fire. It's just, does it come in the way of a Biletnikoff? Does it come in the way of one of the best wide receiver seasons we've seen in quite some time? So I think a lot's on the table, but let's move over to another wide receiver that I think is going to set the world on fire, and Cam Coleman. Now, this one might be a little bit more benign than the others that I've thrown out there, because this kid is definitely the betting favorite. I don't know if there's odds on it out right now, but I think this kid, Cam Coleman, will almost assuredly be the SEC Freshman of the Year, barring injury. This kid is absolutely out of this world. Now, there's still dudes that will give him a run for their money. You have Colin Simmons over at Texas. Ryan Williams is coming into Bama very soon. Williams-Nwaneri over at Missouri. LJ McCray at Florida. Tons of really, really talented freshmen coming into the SEC that are ready to kind of ruin this for Cam Coleman, but this kid just looks further along. He looks like he's going to play a bigger part in his offense than some of those other kids will in their offense or defense, respectively. So I think this kid is going to make big play after big play. He's going to make the SEC or the Sports Center top 10 over and over and over again throughout the year. I think he's going to make Auburn fans very, very excited, and I would not be surprised at all if he was in Biletnikoff talks, because this dude is really good. But I'll temper my expectations just a little bit, give him SEC Freshman of the Year, and he'll move forward from there, I'm sure. But let's get to one last one, and this one has to do with the Aggies over there in College Station. I think this Texas A&M team is being a little bit overlooked, and I think there's some things to be skeptical of. Obviously, you lost a number of players through the portal. You have a number of things that just aren't quite the way it's going to you'd like it to be. Mike Elko coming in this first year, Connor Wegman coming back from an injury, not really sure what you're going to get from him. But I think this team has a lot of really, really good things in place. The talent level is still very high, despite all of those guys that found their way elsewhere. Nick Scourton coming in from Purdue is as big of a transfer portal pickup as you will find in this cycle. Shamar Stewart is going to be incredible on that D-line as well. They're going to tear teams apart on the offensive line. I'll be totally honest with you. This is going to be a very aggressive attack. And with Mike Elko calling the shots, it's going to be a defense that hits you in the face a couple of times. I'm going to be totally honest with you. There are so many ways that this team can beat you, but the way that I look at it is they're going to be we're going to make you beat us. We're not going to beat ourselves type of team. You're going to have to beat us down. You're going to have to, deal with a defense that is not going to give you an inch. And you're going to have to grind away and come out, scratched and bloodied and bruised and all of that good stuff when you talk about Mike Elko's teams. And I think it's going to cause problems for some teams. A&M has Notre Dame, LSU, Missouri, and most importantly, obviously, Texas at the end of the year, all on their schedule. Now, I don't know if they're going to be the knockout punch for some of these playoff teams' hopes, but I do think they're going to spoil some of them, and it's going to make some of these roads to the playoff for some of these teams a lot thinner, a lot quicker. So that Notre Dame game is very interesting because you get it at Kyle Field. Texas, you get at Kyle Field as well. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this team unfold. I think there's a chance that they win some games they're not supposed to win, but lose some games they're not supposed to lose. But I think they'll get off to a right start, and I think one of these wins will happen, and it'll shock some people, that's for sure. But it'll be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. Spring is obviously a time where we get into some overreactions, and we get a little bit excited about our teams, get a little bit maybe too amped up, but who cares, right? It's a very, very fun thing to do around this time of year, so we're going to continue doing it. We'll bounce around to different conferences as the next week goes through, but this is a really great idea. Shout out to Tom Fernelli over at CBS for kind of inspiring this idea in me. I promise I did not steal his ones, but I thought this was a really fun idea, so I thought I would throw mine out there, but we'll definitely continue with this. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we got a transfer portal update for you. Some big-time commitments came off the board, and there's still a lot of guys out there to be had, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I want to break down everything for you guys right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some spring overreactions from the SEC, tons of stuff to take away from the spring, but I had a couple of good ones in me, so if you missed that, you can definitely check that out on our page, but let's get to transfer portal updates. There has been a ton going on. You know, the transfer portal has just closed. Some guys found their way in at the very, very last second, so there was a little bit of a windfall. Some commitments are coming in, so I wanted to break down where we're at right now and where we could be ending up. But let's start with some of the commitments that came off the board, and let's start with the quarterback position. We had two guys come off the board that were really the two last big-time quarterbacks that were left on the board, and it starts with Jeff Sims committing to Arizona State. This was just Jaden Rashada opening a door and Jeff Sims sprinting through it. This dude absolutely struggled a little bit during his time at Georgia Tech and Nebraska. Someone that is a great athlete and definitely can, give you some really good plays, but has been really inaccurate when throwing the football, and hopefully Kenny Dillingham can get the most out of him, but it sounds like it's his job to lose just because there is not a lot of quarterback talent over there in Tempe right now, so a huge thing for him. Definitely not necessarily what Arizona State was picturing at quarterback this year, but still a super athletic kid that can give you some good football when put in the right situations. And then Nick Evers, another guy who was at Oklahoma originally, went to Wisconsin for a year, has now found his way to UConn. So took a little bit of a step down. This is kind of what I expected for him, but I thought it was a great place for him to end up. You have a great pickup for Jim Mora and the Huskies, a team that is slowly getting better and better since Jim Mora got there. This kid has really, really good arm talent. He can do a ton of things with the football, and I think he could really ball out at the lower level. Now, I don't know if he's going to be an NFL draft pick by any means, but definitely could have a very, very successful career and do some really fun things up there in Storrs, Connecticut. But let's move on to a team that continues to make headlines, and that's UCF. That team is cleaning up in the portal right now. Penny Boone is the most recent commit to UCF. They are on an absolute heater. This is a major pickup. This is probably the biggest pickup they've had thus far. Picking up someone like that to go with RJ Harvey and KJ Jefferson in those run packages. And then you have Ja'Cory Brown on the bench that you can bring in at any point and give you a little bit of a boost there as well. So an absolutely huge pickup for them. Penny Boone is going to be one of those players that UCF fans are going to absolutely fall in love with. And that run game with RJ Harvey is going to be really mean, I'll be totally honest with you. And then they got Jacoby Jones, a receiver coming out of Ohio, had about 1,000 yards a year ago, so a very talented kid that can give you a lot of production, and they needed some help at that wide receiver position, so a huge pickup there. And then they added someone on the defensive side just to round things out. They got a safety from East Tennessee State University, Sheldon Arnold II, a very talented kid, a kid that was an FCS All-American a year ago, had 4 picks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 touchdowns on the defensive side of the ball, so this is an immediate starter. I don't think there's any question about that. They need some help on that back end of that defense, and this kid can definitely provide it right away. So a huge pickup for them there. And then they were battling for Jason Zandamela, but they ended up missing out on him. Florida picks up Jason Zandamela, and this is absolutely huge for Florida for a number of reasons. But they officially have the number 1 quarterback, the number 1 D lineman, and the number 1 interior offensive lineman in the 2024 class with DJ Lagway at quarterback, LJ McCray at D-line, and now Jason Zandamela at interior offensive line. Just remarkable. It took a little bit longer to get Zandamela on campus, but a remarkable pickup for this team, and I don't know if he's going to be a starter this year. He might be because they've lost a couple of guys to the portal at that position, but at the latest, he will be on the field in 2025, and will be starting for quite some time for them. But let's stay in the offensive line and talk about James Brockermeyer, a guy that left Bama and had a no contact tag on his portal entry, and he ended up where we thought he would end up, at TCU alongside his brother Tommy. This dude's an immediate starter. There's no question about that. He was competing to start at Bama at that center position, so I expect him to be the starter right next to his brother on that offensive line. So a huge pickup for TCU, definitely helps out a position that was a little bit thinner than they would have loved it to be. One guy that was very interesting to watch throughout this process was Anthony Johnson Jr., a very talented corner that was coming out of Western Kentucky. He has apparently decided he wants to be in Western Kentucky, so this is a little bit of a surprise to me. I thought that he would have a ton of teams coming after him and really, really being aggressive towards him. Never really coalesced the way that I think a lot of people expected, so he has found his way back to Western Kentucky, is going to, I'm sure, have an incredible year for them again this year, and hopefully maybe find another place next year, maybe stick around and get drafted in the NFL, who knows, but a huge thing for Western Kentucky for sure. Another safety on here, Jaden Milliner-Jones, who was coming from Colorado. He is committed to SMU, so a Texas kid coming back to Texas, and SMU actually picked up Billy Walton, who is a Texas player who was transferring away, an absolutely huge pickup for them. Two very young, talented kids that they can absolutely build a solid foundation around. And then you have Kendrick Blackshear, another guy from Texas who seems like he's leaning towards SMU or TCU. He's from that Dallas area, so it would make sense that he's leaning towards those two schools. But then we have Jaden Wayne, a very talented edge rusher who was at Georgia, decided to move to Miami before making his way up to Washington. So now Jedd Fisch has a very good player on defense and someone that will absolutely play immediately, partly just because they need bodies up there in Washington, that's for sure. And then the biggest one of the day, the one that everyone was kind of waiting on, especially myself. I had to rewrite some different graphics and things of that nature after this dropped, but Dominic Williams commits to Oklahoma, a huge pickup for Oklahoma. They were battling Texas, they were battling LSU towards the end, and then apparently there were some reports that USC was in on the conversation, but it ended up being Oklahoma, an absolutely massive pickup for that team. That D-line just gets meaner and meaner. It feels like Brent Venables is really getting the team that he really wants there, and they're going to be physical, that's for sure. A huge pickup for them. I think it fits what Brent Venables has been incredible at, which is getting those a little bit shorter, a little bit undersized. This guy isn't small by any means, but is 6'2", is a little bit shorter than normal defensive tackles. Getting those guys to be the best that they can possibly be is something Brent Venables absolutely did an incredible job of at Clemson, and this is a guy that fits that bill. So it'll be really interesting to watch, but let's get to the players that are still on the board, that are still sitting there and still have some ability to make their way into some big-time situations. And let's start with Peyton Woodyard and Jacoby Matthews. These two guys have kind of been tied together because Oregon needs a safety, and they've decided that they'd rather have Peyton Woodyard than Jacoby Matthews. So it sounds like they're leaning more towards Peyton Woodyard, who is pretty much all locked in on Oregon. I would expect that to happen fairly quickly, to be totally honest with you. But Jacoby Matthews has backed off a little bit. He is looking the way of Washington and Colorado, apparently pretty soon here. Would be an immediate starter at both of those places, almost assuredly, so would be a great pickup for either of those teams. You have another player, Isaiah Hamilton, who's on here. He's still sitting out there, but probably not for long. He is on a visit to Ole Miss for the time being. He had set a visit for Bama after the visit to Ole Miss, which has then been canceled. So that usually is what happens when a player is ready to commit. So I expect that to come. I expect that to come relatively quickly in the next little bit. I think he's a very, very talented kid, and Lane Kiffin has done everything in his ability to make sure that back end at least has 5 guys that can play. So they have tons of bodies there, but it's going to work out, I suppose. And then you have Austin Jordan, a Texas cornerback transfer. He is taking a visit to TCU this weekend. Definitely would be a huge help for them. Would probably at least get immediate playing time. Not sure if he would be the starter or not, but will play that boundary corner position for TCU and played some really good snaps for Texas, whether it was on defense as a rotational corner or on special teams, was a fantastic special teamer. So definitely will be a huge help to them. And Texas is looking to replace that guy and Terrence Brooks, who is another corner that walked out of the building, with Javian Cole, a San Jose State transfer, a very talented kid who has a ton of good football behind him, but still can, reach that next level. It sounds like Texas is the slight favorite, but you have teams like Auburn and Michigan State that are in on this conversation. He has scheduled a visit to Auburn next weekend, is in Texas right now, so could be an Isaiah Hamilton situation where that Auburn schedule gets canceled, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how that one develops. Would be a huge pickup for any one of these teams, but Texas definitely needs some of that cornerback help. Deshaun Jones, another cornerback out of Wake Forest, is a guy to watch. It sounds like he's leaning LSU and Corey Raymond, a guy that is a wizard when it comes to recruiting, so no surprise there. There are definitely some other teams that are in on him, but LSU needs someone, and I think they will go all out to get this kid. Tyler Barron is another kid to watch, an edge rusher out of Tennessee, or out of Louisville, I guess, out of a ton of different schools, it feels like, but it's a USC-Miami battle, it seems. I think he just came off a visit from Miami, is heading to USC this weekend. If USC can pick him up, I think that D-line could get very mean very quickly, and a big reason for that is because they're in on Derek Harmon, who is a D-lineman from Michigan State, a very, very talented defensive tackle, and it feels like they're battling Colorado, but you have Oregon, Ohio State, and a return to Michigan State all on the table. So that will be a very interesting one to watch as we get down to the wire there. One of his teammates, Simeon Barrow Jr., is a very talented kid that a lot of teams have been after. It sounds like is an LSU lean right now. Miami and Missouri are in the mix for the pursuit. Texas did miss out on Dominic Williams, so would not be surprised if they were giving Barrow Jr. a call right about now. But it sounds like LSU, Miami, and Missouri are the teams to watch right now. He might just commit today. There were some reports around Pete Nakos at On3 saying that, so it'll be really interesting to watch this one over the next 24 hours, see if it comes to fruition there. And then we have Elijah Herring, one of the most talented linebackers in the class right now. Someone definitely to watch. He has taken visits to Kansas State and Colorado, but it sounds like Virginia Tech is the team to beat here. It sounds like he was not, I don't know if he wasn't impressed with either of those places, but it sounds like Virginia Tech is the one that really blew him out of the water and probably the leader in the clubhouse right now. And then we'll round it out with the only offensive player that really has much to speak of right now, with Elijah Badger, someone that is coming from Arizona State, left shortly after Jaden Rashada left, and he is visiting Florida and Arizona soon, two schools that it would be insane to see him go to for kind of different reasons. Obviously, you would have incredible duos at either of those places with Elijah Badger and Trey Wilson at Florida, or Elijah Badger and Tatori McMillan at Arizona, but especially if you went to Arizona, that Arizona State game would get very contentious. Now, I'd lean Florida for the time being, but who knows? It could change very, very quickly. There are a couple other guys here. You had Gavin Freeman from Oklahoma is a very talented special teamer. You have a ton of guys that are kind of popping in here and there. So this likely will not be the last time we give you guys a little bit of an update, but it's starting to wind down. We're starting to get past the craziness, and it wasn't quite as crazy as we once thought, but definitely had some ers and ahs in there for sure. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the updates and content, everything you could possibly need in the world of sports. We have incredible people covering every sport you could possibly want. So tons on the GSMC Sports page. If you ever need anything, come our direction and we have you covered. So thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys Monday.